Hello, my lovely listeners. I'm Dr. Mary Barson.
And I'm Dr. Lucy Burns. Welcome to this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss. Good morning, lovely listeners. It's Dr. Lucy here this morning, and I am without Dr. Mary, but as you know, I always bring you a beautiful special guest when Dr. Mary is not available. And this morning, I am super excited to be talking to a woman I think you will find incredibly interesting. She has a wealth of experience and information and lived experience in a condition called lipedema. And so I'd love to welcome to the podcast, Megan Pfeffer. Welcome, Megan.
Hi, Dr. Lucy. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and so nice to be chatting with you.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, we were just chatting off air about the word lipedema or lipedema or lipoedema or all of the various connotations of the word. So I would love for you to perhaps tell us a bit about A, the pronunciation, and B, its history.
Sure. Well, I think depending on where you are in the world on how people will pronounce it. So some people say lipedema, some people say lipoedema. Of course, what we don't want people saying is lipidemia, because that's actually a different condition. So doctors have heard about lipidemia, but not so much lipedema. So lipidemia, of course, is a blood fat disorder. So quite different to lipedema, which is a connective tissue, a loose connective tissue or body fat disorder, an adipose cell disorder. So very different conditions, but it was actually, in 1940 that the Mayo Clinic in the United States first talked about lipedema. So, quite a long time ago, which is really remarkable given how little the medical community knows about it. And so in the early 1950s, they came up with some diagnostic, kind of criteria so that people could start familiarising themselves with the different symptoms that they saw were common at the time. And these are sort of slightly changing over time. And at the moment, we're trying to have that more rigorously established. It has been around for a long time, but very little is known. It's not taught in medical schools. It wasn't taught to me as a clinical nutritionist in my health science degree.
Absolutely. The first time I heard it was actually on the Keto Woman podcast, where Daisy Brackenhall was interviewing somebody about it. And I'm thinking, she's made a mistake. She means lymphedema, because lymphedema is quite common and most people have heard of that. And so, for ages I'm thinking lipedema. No, you mean lymphedema. And then I listened, obviously, more and thought, you're talking about a completely different condition here.
Yeah, it really is. And it's often misdiagnosed as lymphedema, which is, swelling, often asymmetrical. So lipedema will affect both limbs typically, whereas lymphedema, not necessarily, but we do have lipolymphedema, which is an added component or a comorbidity to lipedema, where over time, combined with obesity, can then go on to what we call lipolymphedema, which is kind of that triad of lipedema, obesity, and then lymphedema. So lymphedema is where the lymphatic system isn't functioning properly, and lipedema is where the fat cells and the matrix around them aren't functioning well. So there's certainly misdiagnosis as the lymphedema or just as simple obesity. And it's really important to be raising awareness, which is why it's so fantastic for you to be including this. It's not a popular or well-known condition, but it is so important to raise awareness because it does affect it's estimated to affect up to 11% of people, which was the Foldy Clinic in Germany who estimated that. So it affects a large percentage of the population of women worldwide, and they're being misdiagnosed. And there are different treatment regimes that are needed for both conditions. And progression, the main thing with lipedema is you really want to stop progression, because it can progress to it can be life-threatening for people and does take lives. But it can really take away mobility, and it can take away social connectedness and, with fat stigma and all of those sorts of things. So it's really important that it is diagnosed so it can be treated properly to stop that progression.
Totally. You've hit the nail on the head there. So what are the symptoms of lipedema? Like what would people be looking for?
So typically most women will identify with some, if not all, of the symptoms. So you don't have to have all of the symptoms, but most commonly it occurs in females, although I do believe it's much more common in males than what is reported. So there are very rare cases reported of males with hormonal disturbance. However, I do think it's much more common, but typically it occurs in women, and some women who have always identified that they've had bigger legs. But for some people, it can be, that painful legs. They can be painful to the touch. So you can have that disproportionately increased loose connective, or the fat on the limbs. So that's kind of a big giveaway, is that what we call that gynoid fat distribution in the lower half of the body for females, where typically doesn't cause cardiovascular disease unless obesity then follows it, because it's not that independent weight around the waist. But it will be either, you can have it either in the buttocks, in the hips, in the thighs, in the lower calves as well, or exclusively just in one of those areas. So different women will identify with different parts that are problematic for them, but you can actually feel nodules under the skin. So typically they can be like rice, the size of rice grains, or perhaps like peas, or even as big as walnuts under the skin when you palpate. The more weight that's there sometimes can be harder to palpate them, but you can definitely feel under the skin in a lot of the lipedema areas, these lumpy sort of tissue. So that, we call them nodules, but it can also, as I said, it can be painful to the touch or just painful all the time. I identify with it being painful. I have lipedema myself, and I could identify with if my partner were to grab me on the thigh, for example, and not grab me hard, but it would hurt. So that sensitive touch. And also, the abdomen can be affected, and the upper arms. And so often the literature will just say that it's in the legs, and, for some women that it's the upper arms, but some women do have it in the lower arms. It can be seen in the hands. It can be seen in the abdomen and around the breasts. So it can be more extensive than we give it credit for. And so it can also, include edema, orthostatic edema. So standing for long periods of time or sitting for long periods of time can, create that collection of fluid, and that's resolved when you're lying down or elevating your legs. But of course, the actual heaviness in the legs itself isn't alleviated. So you may have this extra feeling of swelling in the legs. Some of it in the ankles, for example, can be alleviated when you put them up, but not so much. The legs themselves can just feel very heavy, and even hot weather and flying can really aggravate it. So I know that hot weather can be really problematic, and airplane travel as well.
And it's different to just, how women are often a pear shape, like they, it can be just normal to have, a little, your fat stores on your hips and your thighs. It's different to that, isn't it?
It is, yes, because obviously as women we do have more weight there. So I guess, what we're really talking about is it can be, and especially like rapid accumulation of weight, you'll normally find like excessive weight gain can happen quickly, but particularly when lipedema is being triggered, which can happen at different times. So it has genetic underpinnings, but it can also be affected by hormones. So at those times of hormone fluctuations, which can be as young as puberty, it can be in pregnancy, it can be in menopause, but also just in weight gain. But as we know, women do have weight gain anyway. So it's really that, we call it that disproportionate weight gain, where you're really not seeing the fat, kind of distributed all over. You're still fitting into your clothes. Quite often women with lipedema will have very small waist sizes or very small upper body, and a very large disproportionate size where you're wearing different sizes on your bottom half than you are on your top half. But that can be, it really does depend on the woman, because some people will just have swollen or larger calves that are heavy and that they can feel are very different and can have the lipedema nodules in there. But some women don't experience the pain. So when you see the pictures of lipedema, though, it becomes very apparent, and there's often a fat pad beneath the knee. And as the condition progresses, you can have what we call lobules that can overhang the knees as well, and in different areas. So it's not a clear, distinct picture of these really big, wide hips with a tiny waist, though that's a really easy kind of one to spot. Yeah, but there are definitely different shapes and size. Stage 1 lipedema, we stage it through to either stage 3 or 4, depending on who you're talking to, will have very different looks to it. But typically, I think women will first identify with it saying, my legs have always been different. They always feel different. They look different to other women's. That to me is something, if you've experienced that before, is a really great place to go, okay, maybe I'll look into this and just find out a bit more about it and see if it's possible that this could be something I have, because again, that really comes back to that early diagnosis really can help to stop that progression, because then you can introduce the lifestyle factors that can really be helpful.
Absolutely. Okay. So I guess then we'd be thinking, if the weight goes on disproportionately around, maybe legs, then same with weight loss. So people will lose weight everywhere except their lipedema affected areas.
That's right, yeah. So you can have, and a classic example is people having bariatric surgery that are actually suffering malnutrition and, in starvation mode, but they still have not lost any weight off their legs. That's a very common thing that women will identify as well, that regardless of what I do, nothing seems to work. Exercising more can actually create more inflammation for women with lipedema. So that's something else that people may identify with, that they actually feel worse after excessive exercise as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So therefore, the mantra that we've all heard, eat less, move more, is actually terrible for people who have lipedema.
It's actually not only terrible, it's doing more harm than good. With the health professional community, where we are supposed to first do no harm, I personally find that in my clinic, the women who come to me are often not eating enough. They've been dieting their entire lives. They've been continuously told to eat less. They've down-regulated their metabolism severely. They're not burning as many calories anymore. They've sometimes, when your body isn't getting enough calories to run everything, that can compromise your reproductive system and, other things that your body doesn't deem as important because it doesn't have enough energy to run it properly. So that's a real concern and a real problem for women in this community, especially when you think of things like how important protein is. If you're not eating enough calories, you're likely not eating enough protein, and that's going to have knock-on effects. You're going to compromise your immune system. You're going to, compromise your mental health and how well you're feeling. Your reproductive system, everything relies on protein. It's the building blocks of life. And it's interesting because women with lipedema, they find, don't have the same muscle mass, particularly for women with obesity and lipedema, that you would normally find that you would have an increased muscle mass to support the extra weight, whereas women with lipedema don't tend to have that. So that to me means that it's even more important that we protect our muscle mass. And so having a healthy diet is such a big part of that. And I hear so many incredibly sad stories from women that are just blamed and shamed, we call it, for their fat, that they must be lying about what they're eating. They're clearly, binging and eating all sorts of foods that are outside of what they're telling. And it's very hard to make a connection and help someone when you can't build a level of trust. And you can't take someone at face value that what they're eating and what they're telling you they're eating is right. And if you have a good relationship with someone, they're going to open up and tell you what they're eating because it helps to explain what's happening for them. They're happy to share that if they feel that they're in a safe space with someone who won't judge them, who understands, all of the different components that happens with severe calorie restriction, because as you would know, Dr. Lucy, that if you restrict calories for long enough, your body will start upregulating hormones to say, okay, we're taking over here. We clearly can't trust you to eat enough. You're depriving us. We can't run the body like this anymore. It starts upregulating your hunger. You start craving carbohydrates. And that's the moment where women feel like they're failing and they don't have enough willpower. And they start eating and putting on excess weight and all that weight back on.
Absolutely. I feel like you're speaking my language, because we always say hunger will trump willpower every single day of the week. And it's because hunger is a biological driver and it's nothing to be ashamed of. But we get, so many mixed messaging as women that if you're hungry, then you must somehow be greedy or, deficient, or, you just don't have any fortitude, when really it's your body screaming out for nutrients.
Yes, absolutely. And so many women, I think, can identify with only ever just taking the edge off their hunger. they've dieted for so long that they're having these small meals and frequent meals, which also leads into that foraging effect because, when you're eating carbohydrates, as we know, and if you're eating them frequently throughout the day and you're going to be on that blood sugar roller coaster, then when you have the dips on the other side of that roller coaster, when your blood sugars start dipping, your body is going to make you seek out food to rebalance your blood sugar levels. And like you say, it's really hard to go against that. It's not, willpower will not win over the body's needing to survive. And it needs to reestablish that homeostasis of balanced blood sugars because, that's one of the biggest things that our bodies are doing as far as nutrients in, nutrients out during the day, reestablishing that homeostasis. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And, I love a diet rant and I am sick and tired of women being judged and told that they need to eat less when so many of them are eating less. Like they're not eating enough, they're hungry, they're tired, and they're told, well, if you're not thin, because thinness has been, idolised, if you're not thin, then that's because you're eating too much and that's because you're greedy and hopeless. So, it's your own fault.
Yeah, it's just such incredibly poor advice to be giving to people and really means, I think, a lack of understanding of really how the body works and how women's bodies work. Because, women, we can talk about obviously overeating mixed in there sometimes as well. But that also becomes part of the food deprivation the body needs to fuel and needs that extra food and will drive, I think, in itself sometimes the binging. And then some people will have, binging disorder as well. So that can be mixed in there too, but it can be interspersed with, oh my God, I've just spent the last 3 months depriving myself of every food I enjoy. I'm constantly hungry. I'm constantly not feeling well and I'm getting depressed and anxious and, all of these things when you're not fueling your body well. So, and then on top of that, I think you kind of just feel like, well, what's the point of stopping all of these foods that I love that you've been craving because you're not getting to enjoy your food? And really, essentially, we all just want to enjoy our food. And there are certainly ways to be able to do that and lose weight. And I think people think that that's an exclusive relationship.
And again, I think diet culture is completely responsible for that with its even terminology of cheat days and breaking your diet. And it really encourages this all or nothing mentality and, that it's all right to start again on Monday. And it's like, so between now and Monday, you eat as much as you can. And, there's I think a meme somewhere that says, eat, drink and be merry for tomorrow we diet. And it's like, just enough. It isn't helpful. The all or nothing is so unhelpful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really time to change the language, isn't it? And to change the entire culture of eating well. And I guess that's really what we're trying to do as far as low carb and keto, though, isn't it? Really, we're walking away from what we know about losing weight, which has always just been cut down the calories and weigh yourself. And if you've lost weight, well, then you're succeeding and you're going to be, you're healthier, but actual health isn't really talked about as such. It's just purely about losing weight. And we know how poorly the scales are actually a measure of true weight loss when you're doing it in a healthy way. And yeah, that's another big thing for people to learn.
Oh, absolutely. Breaking up with the scales, we call it. Because, your worth as a woman is not measured by the number on the scales.
That's right. Yeah. And how you feel about yourself day in and day out shouldn't be dictated by what the scales say. Now, some people find that really helps to motivate them. And if that's the case, that's really terrific. But I certainly have had a lot of people who have been disappointed that they haven't lost weight. But when I've asked them how their body measurements have changed, they have lost inches. And even though they have said, yes, okay, well, I've actually lost X amount of inches from my waist, they can't quite compute that with success because the scales aren't showing that it's any less. And so I would hate to imagine how many people have given up on low carb and keto because the scales aren't necessarily saying anything different, not realising that there's other non-scale victories.
Oh, absolutely. I always say to people, look, it's not your fault. It's not our fault. We have been conditioned to that. The only measure of success is those pesky scales. And having been a dieting queen, I would step on the scale 6 times a day. And it truly became this like a little addiction because I was always looking for that little bit less. So you go and do a wee, hop on the scales, and then I'd feel better if the number was lower, which when you say it out loud, it's ridiculous because clearly the number is lower because I've had a wee. But it didn't matter because it was all just about the number.
Yes.
Just quite disordered thinking, but I was completely unaware of that.
Yeah, and it's something that really surpasses the intellect, isn't it? It's not about intellectual knowledge, because most women know that if you go to the bathroom and weigh yourself and it's different, that you have not lost weight in that meantime, but just psychologically, yes, seeing that number, to feel like you're doing okay, to be told that all of these efforts you're making are somehow working, even though they're clearly not working well if you have to go and have a wee to get some kind of response in the numbers. Yeah, it's something that, we really need to change the knowledge for people.
And I think you absolutely made a great point there, that for a lot of us dieting, it was about restriction, it was about hunger, it was about punishing yourself at the gym, but it would all be worth it if you weighed less.
Yes.
So it was like this transaction. I'm going to do all of these things and then I will weigh less and my life will be fabulous.
Yes. And not even kind of really correlating that with, well, what are my health markers? How are my health markers moving with that? And people who are doing calorie-restricted diets that still allow them to have all of the pastries and the desserts and things like that, which are really, in my mind, appealing to the food addiction part of foods. So they're causing, okay, well, as long as you restrict your calories low enough, you can still keep these processed foods that you're addicted to going. And it's just this perpetual addiction in itself. So that's really problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then by using up all your calorie allowance on, pastries or whatever, then you don't have any left for proper food and nutrition. So
yes.
None for protein.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I guess the thing, though, bringing that back to lipedema, is that there are plenty of women with lipedema who don't have excess weight on their body. They have this diseased fat. And so, even if they're calorie restricting, that they're not able to shift that fat. And so, that's going to be problematic, because not everyone with lipedema has excess weight outside of that can be easily moved. So you could do a weight loss diet, a calorie-restricted diet, and lose weight perhaps from the upper part of the body, and that's a really common thing, that you lose the weight off the tummy or the upper part of the body or off the breasts, but not off the upper arms or the legs.
Yes, and in fact, I like that word you just said. So lipedema is diseased fat. It's not normal fat tissue or adipose tissue. It doesn't behave like normal adipose tissue. You and I both know, and hopefully now all our listeners know, that the majority of adipose tissue or fat stores is blocked by insulin. And so reversing your insulin or lowering your insulin will give you access to those. But that's not the case necessarily with lipedema fat, is it?
Yes. So insulin, we believe, works differently in lipedema fat cells. And because there's also closely related with other hormones, which could be estrogen, we're not sure, could be progesterone, could be other hormones interlinked in there, that the fat cells do behave differently. So we believe that we need to lower insulin even further to possibly be able to access those fat cells. But only time, of course, will tell that. And we don't have the benefit of having any ketogenic diet studies where we're able to then biopsy and have a look at, how are these fat cells improved or different from when it was started. But we do know that lots of women have success. Clinically, we know that they're having success with weight loss and feel like they lower weight in areas where they're having problem with lipedema. So suddenly they are able to lose weight off their legs, where previously they haven't been able to do that before. So how much of that is the actual lipedema fat? How much of that is fluid? Because, of course, one of the issues with lipedema, it's not just the fat, but it's also an accumulation of fluid. So we think that there are leaky capillaries involved. So we have this fluid loss from capillaries that the lymphatic system isn't able to keep up with. And so we get this accumulation of fluid in and around the fat cells, which then, binds to what we call GAGs. They bind to these carbohydrates that actually make the fluid spongy. And so that stops it from being this you get free fluid, but you also get this bound fluid to these GAGs. And so that can really increase the size, of course, of the fat cells. And with this leaky fluid that's happening, that can actually increase the growth of fat cells. And then, of course, we have a chronic inflammatory response because we have these adipose cells that are enlarging and multiplying. And that, of course, initiates a chronic immune response where you start getting white blood cells that are coming to the fat cells to try to fix what's going on. Of course, they can't do that, so more and more white blood cells are sent. In obesity, you'll find that the cells seem to be the same size, but in lipedema, we get what we call these multinucleated cells or crown-like structures that actually change the shape and the size of these cells beyond what you find in obesity. So you get these dysregular fat cells as well. So you have this chronic inflammatory response going on, which you also would have in obesity, but certainly in lipedema.
Megan, I think it is fascinating that this, basically, as you said, it's abnormal or diseased fat tissue that is barely spoken about and has just been lumped in with standard fat tissue and treated the same, which, as you and I both know, it's not even a helpful way that people are generally recommending treatment of fat storage, is just to restrict your food. But what I would love to do is have you back next week so we can actually talk about the treatment of this. So what can people do about it? Because first step, obviously, is having awareness and recognising, oh my God, this might be me. And the second step then is, oh, okay, it could be me. Now what do I do? And so I think it would be a really important conversation for us to have. So lovely listeners, keep your ears peeled because we are coming back next week to talk about the treatment and what you can actually do if you think you've got this condition to get diagnosed and then seek treatment for it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Lucy.
All right, no worries. Lovely Liz, I will see you, hear you, talk to you next week with Megan, and we're super excited. Bye for now. So, my lovely listeners, that ends this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss. I'm Dr. Lucy Burns.
And I'm Dr. Mary Barson. We're from Real Life Medicine. To contact us, please visit rlmedicine.com.
And until next time, thanks for listening. The information shared on the Real Health and Weight Loss podcast, including show notes and links, provides general information only. It is not a substitute, nor is it intended to provide individualised medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor can it be construed as such. Please consult your doctor for any medical concerns.